Welcome to New American Mythos, where old stories are kindled like firelight, and we gather round to remember the tales that shaped us. Tonight's tale is a siege story, a ring of iron around a hill town, thirst in the streets, fear in the councils, and one woman who refuses to bargain with despair. We're in the hill country of Israel, at a place called Bethulia, a Jewish city whose survival matters because it commands the narrow ways toward Jerusalem. Holofernes, the general that King Nebuchadnezzar sends to subdue the western lands, lays siege as part of a sweeping imperial march, cutting off water and hope alike, until deliverance seems impossible, unless God chooses an unexpected instrument. And he does. Her name is Judith. Now, the book of Judith frames itself in the ancient world of empires. It opens by placing the crisis under Nebuchadnezzar, described as reigning over Assyria from Nineveh. But that very opening also signals what kind of work this is. Historically, those details don't line up cleanly, and modern scholarship widely treats Judith as purposeful historical blending, a sacred moral narrative meant to teach courage and providence under oppression, more than to function as a strict chronicle. Most scholars place the composition of Judith in the 2nd century BC, in the long pressure cooker era when God's people lived under the shadow of larger powers, and the question wasn't merely, can we win, but can we remain faithful? But what is this story doing in our season, Echoes of Albion? Well, amazingly, centuries later, this very story crosses into the English imagination in a striking way. The Old English version of the poem, Judith, survives in the Noel Codex, which is the same manuscript that preserved Beowulf, which we brought to you over the last 2 weeks. And it is a reminder that the Christian poets of early England were taking heroic virtues and settling them under the lordship of God, wherever they found them. It's the perfect hinge between Beowulf's heroic memory and the inward chastening exile tones that we'll meet later. And Judith shows up a surprising amount throughout medieval England and Europe. Now, a word to Protestant listeners, which I myself am one. Judith belongs to what is called the Apocrypha. The 1611 King James Bible printed Judith in an intertestamental apocryphal section, readable but not binding for doctrine. And yet, the Reformers didn't treat it like poison. Martin Luther himself, while classifying Judith as apocryphal, still praised it as, quote, fine, holy, and useful, end quote, worth reading as a work that preaches through its characters. The Puritans, too, were cautious about the Apocrypha as scripture, but they understood the moral pattern. God humbles tyrants, strengthens the faithful, and delivers his people in ways that shame worldly pride. In colonial New England, Cotton Mather could still invoke Judith as a model, proof that the name carried weight in the Protestant moral imagination even across the Atlantic. And finally, Judith's courage is not modern feminist ideology wearing ancient clothing. Medieval and biblical tradition already knew women of deliverance, not as a manifesto, but as a providential sign. When the mighty swagger, God often raises the unlikely. In some tellings, Judith is remembered as a story of charm and seduction, but hear this version differently. The beauty is there, yet it isn't the engine. The engine is covenant faithfulness, and the old holy reversal where God brings down the proud through the obedience of the lowly. So tonight, as the city of Bethulia tightens its belt and counts its last jars of water, listen for the older theme beneath the drama. Covenant courage, faith that refuses to set a deadline for God. This is Judith, the covenant blade. The city groaned. For 30 days, the Assyrian yoke had tightened around the gates of Bethulia. Holofernes, the dreaded war chief of the east, had come like a storm, and the sun rose each morning over a ring of iron. His legions, lean with hunger for conquest, covered the hills and valleys like locusts in a blighted field. Their tents choked the passes, their banners mocked the sky. Nothing went in, and nothing came out. Inside the walls, the people of Israel withered. Water dwindled. Bread crusts were traded like gold. Mothers silenced children, not with lullabies, but with dry hands and tighter belts. Elders wept behind closed doors. The young cried out to heaven. The old cried out for death. Hunger hollowed every heart, and fear followed it. And Judith listened. She was the widow of Manasseh, a woman alone, but not broken. Her husband had died of sunstroke in the barley fields 2 harvests past, and Judith had kept to her house since then, fasting, praying, and clothing herself in sackcloth and discipline. She had learned to live on less than little. When the city's watchmen slumped at their posts and the priests faltered in hope, Judith did not despair. She rose. She moved among the people with quiet command, her eyes bright with something older than fear. Her presence was a rebuke and a comfort. Those who saw her felt both the weight of their doubt and the lift of memory, the kind of memory that stirs when an old hymn is heard again. The elders met in the square to debate surrender, and she stood among them, uninvited, unhindered. Her voice cut through the dust and murmurs. "Will you trade God for a cup of water?" They murmured, ashamed. One man, Uzziah, respected among them, said, "We are dying, Judith. If help does not come in 5 days, we must yield. Better servitude than slaughter." Judith's voice did not rise, but it struck like a hammer. "No, you test the Lord as if he were your servant. Have you forgotten the Red Sea? Jericho, the hand that split the rock will not fail to deliver us, but not by your terms." She turned to the others. "You set a time limit for heaven. You give 5 days to the maker of time, and then what? You bend the knee to a pagan butcher?" Let's pause just for a moment here. There is a kind of unbelief that sounds religious. It doesn't curse God. It simply sets terms for him. 5 days, 1 more week, one last sign, one final confirmation. Judith's rebuke cuts so clean because it exposes a temptation that returns in every age, especially in covenant cultures. When a people have known God's deliverance before, they're still tempted to treat him like a lever. Pull hard enough, long enough, and he must respond on our schedule. But the covenant life isn't a contract with deadlines. It is trust under pressure. It is waiting without controlling. It is obedience before the guarantees. And notice what Judith does next. She doesn't merely scold. She offers herself for costly faithfulness. The story doesn't begin with her blade. It begins with a woman refusing to let fear renegotiate God's sovereignty. Let's get back to the story. They all stared at her. Silence spread like oil. Judith went on. "Give me leave to act, not in anger or pride, but in faith. Let me pass beyond the walls." They asked what she meant. She did not say. She only promised this: "Before your 5 days are done, the Lord shall deliver us by a woman's hand." And so they gave her leave. That night, Judith bathed. She cast off her widow's garb and dressed herself in fine linen, robes her husband had gifted her in better days, embroidered and perfumed. She anointed her skin with oil of myrrh and frankincense, and bound her hair with silver clasps. Gold rings adorned her hands. Around her waist, a sash held a small pouch and a blade. She stood before her maidservant, a loyal girl named Abra, and said, "Come, You shall go with me." As they prepared to leave, Judith knelt before the doorway of her house and prayed aloud. Her words fell like stones in a dry well, echoing where only God could hear. "Lord of strength, God of our fathers, who struck down Pharaoh and drowned his host, who shattered the pride of Sennacherib, who broke Midian beneath Gideon's hand, look now upon your handmaid. Not for lust or glory do I go, but for your name's sake. Use me as you will. Let your enemies fall by my hand, so that your people may rise." Then she rose, and the two women passed through the city. The streets were hushed. Some thought them spirits, Judith in her gleaming robes, Abra with a skin of wine and a sack of bread. At the gate, the watchmen turned their faces, afraid to ask. Judith walked toward the camp of the enemy, as if she were a bride approaching a wedding. Her feet did not falter. Behind her, the walls of Bethulia loomed silent. Before her, the fires of the Assyrians burned bright against the dark. She walked into the valley of death, singing softly under her breath, not a song of mourning, but a psalm of victory not yet won. The wind shifted. Smoke curled in her hair. Somewhere in the distance, a horn called out to mark the changing of the guard. Judith kept walking. Abra followed at a short distance, her hands shaking around the bundle of provisions. She asked no questions. She had only wept once back in the courtyard when Judith had placed the blade in her sash. Now the air grew thick with foreign sounds. Drunken laughter, the scrape of metal, the low murmur of foreign tongues. Campfires flickered like stars fallen to earth, and the stench of meat and sweat and blood reached them like a warning. At the outer edge of the Assyrian encampment, they were halted by guards, spears crossed before them. Judith raised her hands and spoke in the language of the enemy. Her voice was calm, her accent flawless. "I have fled from the Hebrews. I bring news for the great Holofernes. Spare me, and I shall tell him how your army may conquer the hill with no cost of life." The guards hesitated. One of them leered at her beauty. Another looked suspiciously at Abra. But after a moment's counsel, they sent a runner. Judith waited, head bowed. Abra did not speak. When the reply came, they were escorted through the camp, past fires and feasting men, past war horses tethered to blood-dark posts, past the eyes of soldiers who watched them like wolves. Judith walked as if on a pilgrimage, and the tents of the enemy opened before her. They passed long rows of warriors, sharpening swords and laughing with wine-stained mouths. Overhead, banners snapped in the wind, black like the sigil of Holofernes, a coiled serpent over crossed blades. Drums thudded like distant thunder. Judith did not waver. At the heart of the camp stood a great pavilion, taller than the others and lit within by golden lamps. A curtain of red-dyed linen veiled the entrance. 2 guards stepped aside at their captain's order, and Judith entered. Inside, the air was heavy with perfume and sweat. Cushions lined the floor, and bowls of meat steamed on bronze dishes. Holofernes reclined upon a couch of carved cedar, ringed by swordsmen and flatterers. His face was dark-bearded, his eyes sharp, amused. He did not rise, but he nodded once. "So this is the Hebrew prophetess," he said, "come to deliver us the city." Judith bowed, low and slow. "I came to serve the one who holds the rod of power," she said. "If it please you, my lord, I shall reveal all I know." And at that, Holofernes smiled. Part 2. The Assyrian tent swallowed her. Judith stood in the glow of the great pavilion, its curtains thick with incense and pride. Holofernes lounged on his cedar couch, swathed in gold and arrogance. His captains flanked him like dogs at feast, their armor half shed, their eyes sharp with curiosity and dulled with wine. She bowed low. The knife at her waist seemed invisible to them, or irrelevant. She was a woman, and they saw only the silk and the scent, not the silence before the storm. "I am Judith of Bethulia," she said. "I come not in rebellion, but with counsel. The people of my city prepare to betray one another. They grow weak. I will tell you how to break them without blood." Holofernes grinned. "And why would a daughter of Israel betray her own?" She lifted her head. "Because I fear the Lord, and he has told me that your hand shall rise and then fall. You shall prosper for a moment and then be broken. But he shall use even your pride to rescue his people. I offer my part in his plan." Holofernes laughed out loud. "Hey, prophetess, bring her wine!" They did. Judith took it in both hands and drank. Her face gave nothing away. Abra, kneeling behind her, held her tongue and her fear. For 3 nights, Judith remained in the camp. Each day she wandered freely, saying she must purify herself before the Lord. She prayed aloud, facing the hills where Bethulia stood veiled in dust and firelight. And each night she returned to the tent of Holofernes and spoke honeyed words. She told him of Israel's customs, of its rites, of the desperation mounting behind the gates. "In 3 more days," she said on the 3rd night, "they will break. Their priests plan to surrender." Holofernes, drunk with power and wine, summoned her to dine with him privately. "Tonight," he said, "the siege ends." The tent was dim, thick with torchlight and the smell of roasted lamb. Bowls of fruit and flagons of wine littered the table. Judith sat at Holofernes' right hand, her robes resplendent, her face calm. Abra was dismissed, though she remained within earshot, just beyond the linen walls. Holofernes drank deeply and grew loud. He boasted of his victories, of cities burned, of kings humbled. He called her beautiful, wise, dangerous, and promised her a place in Nineveh at his side. Judith answered each praise with a smile and a psalm. "My glory is not mine," she said, "but his who made heaven and earth." At last Holofernes staggered. His words slurred. He reached for her and missed. Judith helped him lie back upon the couch. He fell into a wine-sick slumber, mouth open, hand still clutching the rim of a goblet. She waited. The tent quieted. The guards stood outside, assuming what they wished. Abra held her breath in the shadows. Judith whispered, "Now, Lord?" She crossed to where his great sword lay beside his couch, a curved blade of Assyrian steel, heavy with death. She lifted it in both hands. Her arms trembled, not with fear, but with effort. Twice she struck. The first blow carved his neck halfway. The second took his head. Blood spilled like a curse. Judith wrapped the head in a cloth and placed it in Abra's food sack. She covered the body with a cloak. She called softly, and Abra came. Neither wept, neither spoke. They slipped out into the night like shadows. Let's pause here for a moment. This is the moment that makes modern listeners uneasy, and it should. Scripture and sacred story do not sanitize the world. They show us that evil is not a metaphor. It bleeds, it devours, it besieges cities and starves children. Yet, Judith's act is not presented as bloodlust or spectacle or personal vengeance. She does not rush. She prays. She waits. And she asks, "Now, Lord?" That detail matters. It properly frames the violence as judgment under God, not violence as self-expression or grievance. And that also means it is not a template for private vendetta. Judith is not, quote, "be your own deliverer." She is the opposite. She is the human hand that refuses to claim the glory of deliverance. In a world drunk on power, her courage is terrifying precisely because it is submissive, answering upward before it ever strikes outward. Let's return now to the story. The camp was quiet now, but the silence carried menace. Judith and Abra crept between the dark shapes of tents and dying embers. No one stopped them. No one thought to look. Who among warriors thinks a woman is dangerous? Judith breathed evenly, though her robes clung wet to her skin. Blood, sweat, and incense blurred into a single sickly perfume. Abra followed behind, clutching the sack, her knuckles white with fear. They passed one final checkpoint, a half-drunk sentry who barely glanced their way. Judith raised her chin, eyes cold as stone, and the man turned aside. They were free. Once out of earshot, Judith let out a long breath. Abra nearly collapsed beside her. "You did it," the girl whispered. Judith looked to the hills where the night's edge was graying. "No," she said, "the Lord did it. I was only the hand." They climbed slowly the steep path back to Bethulia, biting into their sandals. Every step away from the Assyrian camp felt like leaving a tomb. And still, Judith did not let her guard fall. She spoke not of triumph, but prayed as she walked. "O God of Abraham, of Isaac, of Jacob," she murmured, "receive this offering, not of beasts, but of justice. Let the nations see your might. Let the haughty be brought low." They paused at a rise to look back one last time. The camp spread below them, like a coiled serpent asleep in its pride. Soon, the headless body would be found. Chaos would follow. Judith nodded once. "Let the trap be sprung," she said. By dawn, they reached the gates. The watchmen saw them and sounded the alarm. Men gathered, weapons drawn, expecting betrayal or madness. But Judith raised her hand, and her voice rang out clear and strong. "Open to me, for the Lord has shattered the head of the enemy." The gates opened. The people gasped. Judith entered the city with Abra at her side and the sack in her hand. In the square, before the elders, she knelt. From the cloth sack she drew the severed head of Holofernes and held it high for all to see. "This is the hand of the Lord," she declared. "He has delivered us, and not by sword or spear, but by faith." The people wailed with awe and joy. Priests tore their garments and wept. The elders bowed down, and then a shout rose up like thunder. "Praise the God of Israel! Praise for his servant Judith!" But Judith only bowed her head. Uzziah stepped forward, trembling, and took the head from her hands. "You have done what no man dared. You are blessed among women." Judith said, "Bless the Lord, who made his will known." Let's pause one last time here. This is the story's true center, not the blade, but the naming. Judith refuses the city's most natural lie. Quote, "We were saved because we were clever," or "We were saved because we were ruthless," or even "We were saved because we finally found the right hero." No, she calls it what it is, the hand of the Lord. That is covenant memory, the discipline of telling the truth about victory. It's how a people survives success without being corrupted by it. Judith's humility isn't a personality quirk. It's a spiritual safeguard. And it's also why this story traveled so well through Christian history, even among Protestants who did not treat it as canon, because the moral pattern remains. God humbles the proud, strengthens the faithful, and calls his people to courage that does not feed on its own reflection. Let's finish the story. Judith returned to her house and removed the garments of victory. She clothed herself again in sackcloth, washed her hands in silence, and fell to her knees in prayer. That morning, as the sun crested the eastern hills, Judith rose and called again for the elders. "Arm the men," she said. "Go to the walls. Watch the enemy fall upon itself. They will not know what has come to pass until it is too late. When they flee, pursue them." The elders obeyed. Trumpets rang out across Bethulia. Spears were lifted, bows strung, and all the city waited. Below, in the Assyrian camp, the moment arrived. A servant pulled back the curtain of Holofernes' tent, expecting to rouse his master. What he saw instead was a couch stained dark, a neck torn open, and a cloak thrown over what had once been a man. He screamed. Panic spread like fire in dry reeds. Commanders shouted over one another. Men ran in all directions. Some said Holofernes had been poisoned. Others swore he had been taken by Hebrew sorcery. No one knew what had happened, but fear ruled them all. And then the gates of Bethulia opened. At first light, the Assyrian camp erupted. Cries rose from every corner. Orders shouted, tents overturned, swords drawn against shadows. Men ran with no command, no formation, no banner. The body of Holofernes lay cold, but his absence burned hotter than fire. "Flee!" some cried. "The gods have judged us." "No," said others. "The Hebrews have summoned demons." Confusion struck harder than any spear. Officers fell as soldiers turned on one another. Packs of terrified men trampled tents and horses alike. Arrows flew without aim. Fires started without cause. The might of the East dissolved in its own terror. From Bethulia's heights, Judith stood watching. Her hair was bound. Her eyes did not blink. "Now," she said, and the gates opened. Uzziah led the charge, trumpet at his lips, sword in his hand. The men of Israel poured from the city like floodwaters from a breached dam. They struck with the fury of starvation and long-withheld justice, and the Assyrians fled before them. It was not a battle. It was a rout. The plain below became a harvest field, and the reapers bore no mercy. Chariots overturned, shields lay abandoned. Proud captains fell without raising a hand. The army that had wrapped the city like iron now scattered like ash. The tribes of Israel pursued for miles. From mountain paths and desert roads, messengers ran to awaken the neighboring villages. Warriors rose from hiding places and joined the hunt. The enemy was thrown into full retreat. The men of Naphtali and Simeon blocked the river crossings. The sons of Levi and Benjamin circled from behind, trapping remnants like game in a snare. By sunset, the Assyrian host had crumbled. Few escaped. Most died without ever seeing the face of their destroyer. By evening, the killing slowed. The Israelites stood breathless, dazed by victory. Judith came down from the wall. She walked among the fallen with a solemn gaze, not seeking glory. Wherever she passed, men bowed their heads. None spoke to her. She was no longer merely Judith. She had become a vessel, the sword of the Lord. That evening, Fires burned for sacrifice, not war. Fat from the rams was offered. Grain and oil were laid at the altar. The priests lifted their voices in thanksgiving. The women wept. The children laughed. And Judith sang. She stood in the courtyard and raised her voice. Her song was not of herself, but of the one who acts through the lowly, who brings down kings by the hand of a widow. Let all nations hear. The Lord is a God of justice. He casts the proud from their seats and lifts the humble to glory. He delivered us not by sword or strength, but by his hand alone. He remembered his people in their affliction. He broke the mighty by the word of his servant. He crowned the widow with honor. Blessed be his name forever. The people echoed her praise. They laid the head of Holofernes upon the city wall, where the wind could find it and the birds remember it. All who approached the city in the days that followed knew, here dwells a people not abandoned. For 3 months Israel celebrated. The men rested from war. The women gathered in circles and told the tale. Children acted out the story with sticks and robes. Musicians composed hymns in Judith's name, but she accepted no honors. She gave all the spoils she had taken to the temple, gold, silver, silks, all laid at the feet of the priests. It was never mine, she said. I did not strike with my own strength. She returned to her home, the small stone house where she had mourned her husband. She resumed her fasts. She wore plain clothes. She asked for no monument. But each year, on the day of deliverance, the people gathered. They lit lamps from house to house. They sang the song of Judith. They remembered how one woman, walking in holiness, brought down a tyrant with no army, no nation, no sword, but the one she borrowed from the enemy. Judith lived to a great age. She judged wisely in the disputes of her people and spoke words that calmed anger in the streets. When young mothers faced fear, they brought their infants to her doorstep and asked for blessings. When men quarreled over land or trade, her counsel carried the weight of stone, and she never turned one away. She did not boast, yet even the elders would rise when she entered a room. She was not queen nor priestess, but something older, a mother to the nation. As years passed, visitors from distant towns came to Bethulia, not for its markets, but to see the house where Judith lived. They brought gifts, wool, fruit, scrolls of songs written in her name. She accepted each one with a smile and offered bread in return. Children would come to sit by her doorway in the evenings. She would tell them stories, not only of Holofernes, but of Deborah and Jael, of Ruth and Rahab. Her voice wove threads of courage into each listening heart. She taught them to fear the Lord, not the sword. When enemies rose again in the east, men trembled. But they also remembered. God delivered us once, they said. He will do it again. And the story of Judith was told anew, in caves, in fields, around fires under the stars. One year, long after the victory, the high priest came from Jerusalem to pay her honor. He brought with him scribes who wrote down every word of her account. They copied her song onto parchment and sent it to every tribe, and the name of Judith was remembered in all of Israel. And when her time came, Judith lay upon her bed, surrounded by the children of the city. She blessed them with her last breath. She asked only for quiet burial near Manasseh, her husband, under the olive trees. They wept, but not without hope, for they knew her life had become more than flesh. It was a promise. No enemy troubled Israel in her days, and long after her voice had quieted, her story still spoke, and it shall speak again. Judith is not a fantasy of power. She is a warning to tyrants and a comfort to the besieged. She reminds us that courage can live inside of holiness and that obedience can be sharper than steel. She also reminds us that deliverance is rarely the way we would write it. God does not always save by the obvious champion. Often he saves by the faithful remnant, the quiet resolve, the person who simply refuses to make peace with despair. And that is one of the great threads running into the American story, not the myth of the self-made savior, but the older inheritance of providence, of conscience, of a people who believe that while tyranny is real, virtue matters, and that God can still overturn the strong by means the strong would never fear. The blade was borrowed, the victory was given, and the covenant call remains. Do not bargain with fear. Do not set deadlines for heaven. Be faithful, steadfast, awake. Thank you for listening to New American Mythos. If you're enjoying Season 2 so far, please follow the show and leave a quick review. It helps new listeners find us. And if you want to stay close to what we're building, please join our mailing list. That's where we share the updates, the behind-the-scenes notes, and the bigger arc of the season. If you'd like to help fund the writing, music, and bonus episodes, you can also support us on Patreon. The links are in the show notes below. Next time, join us for The Battle of Maldon, The Last Stand, a poem where honor doesn't save the day, but it may preserve a people's soul. Until then, keep the memory, keep the fire.